Hello, everybody. Once again, it is time for the Silver Bullets podcast. I am Michael Citro.
And I'm Chip Minnich.
Chip, it is once again time to break down an Ohio State game and look ahead to the next one as we get deeper and deeper into this Big Ten football season, and the Buckeyes are coming off a little bit of an annoying win over Penn State. It was a little bit of a closer game than you and I expected it to be. We saw that Illinois performance, and we saw how Sean Clifford was moving in that game, and we didn't think that he was going to be notably better after getting hit a few times in that game. But he did look a lot more comfortable this week. Ohio State's defense went back to not being able to stop third downs, and that made for a little bit of a nervy evening for Buckeyes fans, I think, as the final score for this one was just 33-24.
Yeah, it was far closer than we had predicted. I mean, I want to credit Penn State, Sean Clifford, for playing far better than we had anticipated. If anything, like you said, there are a lot of concerns that I have, not only defensively, but some things that I saw offensively as well for Ohio State that hopefully that they will spend this coming week getting ready for Nebraska and the subsequent games into November. As Jim Tressel used to say, September is for pretenders, November is for contenders, and we certainly want Ohio State to be a contender.
Yes, we do, and we'll have to see if this team can pick itself up and learn from this Penn State game. It was it was a 7-0 Penn State lead. We've seen this before from Ohio State, falling behind in games and giving up an early touchdown, and that was the case in this game as Penn State took the lead. Really kind of in the later stages of the first quarter on a 5-yard pass from Clifford to Strange, and it was strange to see that happen. But before that, there was a couple of exchanges of possessions. There was a fumble early from Jeremy Ruckert, and then a fumble back the other way from Noah Cain. And you just couldn't get anything going on offense. Ohio State was not very successful running the football, and I think a lot of that is predicated upon Penn State fixing some things defensively against the run after the Illinois game, being up for this game emotionally, but also some things that have been said on Twitter and have been said by some of the players that the Penn State defense seemed to know what some of the plays were before they ran them, and you can probably credit Mike Yurcich for preparing the team, and maybe you can blame a little bit of the Ohio State coaching staff for not changing as much as they maybe should have changed to not tip their hand on some plays.
Well, that is very disconcerting that Ohio State didn't seem to take that into account. Like you said, Mike Yurcich being a former Ohio State assistant, and I do believe that Penn State did probably go back and clean up some things that they were able to after the Illinois loss. But yeah, that's a stinging indictment of the Ohio State offensive coaching staff, which is helmed by Ryan Day, to not have that kind of foresight that, we probably need to adjust the formations and come up with some different ideas in terms of the running game, because like you said, Mike Yurcich having a pretty good understanding of the Ohio State offensive philosophy, playing into his hands certainly was not a good strategy.
Yeah, the offense has taken a little bit of a beating in the public eye this week, even though they were able to go out and score 33 points. A lot of people think it should have been more. I think really it was mainly, for me, play calling issues and maybe the formations they used to call some of these plays. We talked about it on Saturday night on Twitter about how Ohio State was doing, they were just, we're going to play man ball, we're going to get in here with two tight ends, and we're going to run the football in the red zone. And they didn't even think maybe we should just spread them out so that they can't bring guys off the edge and things of that nature. And the one time they did spread out with three wide receivers in the formation was the time Trayvon Henderson was able to get in from a couple yards out there and score a touchdown. But, it just seemed like stubbornness, I think, on Ryan Day's part. We're just going to run the football, and yeah, we're not always going to be successful, but we're going to just keep doing it, and that's fine. But you can't just keep doing the same thing and expect a different result. You have to actually try some different things, and that was kind of reminiscent of some of the defensive problems early in the season where they wouldn't try something different, and they kept giving up, chunk plays.
I'm glad that you mentioned that term stubbornness, because as I was watching it, and I know we'll talk about this in greater detail, sometimes I was getting frustrated with Ryan Day. Instead of taking 3 points, going for it, coming away with nothing. The red zone failures, and I understand. I don't get me wrong. I appreciate the fact that a touchdown is better than 3 points, and math has never been considered my strongest suit. But I do know that 3 points is better than none. And I think that there were some examples of stubbornness. I'm glad that, later on in the game that Ryan Day was willing to take some of the sure points versus, as you said, just being stubborn and going for it, without necessarily, really contemplating, hey, we really need the points.
Yeah. So the Buckeyes tied the game, or not tied the game. They got within 7-3 on a short Noah Ruggles field goal at the end of the first quarter. Then Chris Olave scored on a 38-yard pass from C.J. Stroud in the second quarter. Late in the second quarter, it was really just not a lot of scoring. There were a lot of problems in this game with getting points. But then Ohio State seemed to take a stranglehold on the game when a fumble that was forced against Penn State was picked up by Jerron Cage, and he ran 57 yards for a touchdown. It was 17-7. And at that point, you kind of felt like Ohio State would just go on and win the game, and it wouldn't be an issue.
Right. I mean, and congratulations to Jerron Cage for fulfilling what I can only presume is kind of the fantasy of every defensive lineman across college and pro football. Being able to have a fumble recovery for a touchdown. I certainly enjoyed his fellow defensive lineman fanning him on the sidelines. I thought that was a nice touch.
Yeah.
But getting back to your point, I do believe it certainly felt that the momentum was swinging in Ohio State's favor at that point as soon as Jerron Cage put them up by 10 points.
Yeah, at that point, there's 2:24 to play in the half, and Ohio State just needs to get out of there with the 10-point lead. But Penn State was able to drive down the field in large part because didn't seem to be any officials on the field, Chip, interested in calling a holding play. And I'm not talking about the typical run-of-the-mill, you could call holding on every play. I'm talking about blatant tackling guys in the hole as they're about to sack the quarterback, where it couldn't be more obvious, to the point where it's being pointed out by Chris Fowler and Kirk Herbstreit on the broadcast. Broadcasters notoriously, they might mention a hold here or there, but they don't really make a big deal about it. But so when they do make a big deal about it, it's a factor.
Oh, I could not agree more. It was egregious, and for those of you on Twitter who may follow Bill Rabinowitz of the Columbus Dispatch, he actually, some of the things that Michael's referring to, for those of you who may not necessarily recall the blatant holds that Michael's referring to, Bill Rabinowitz tweeted out the specific plays where, as you said, Ohio State defenders being tackled to the ground in blatant holes that were not called, that largely aided Penn State in being able to get into position to score before the end of the second quarter.
Mm-hmm. So they get the field goal on the last play, a little bit of lift going into halftime. They get the ball first to start the second half, come down the field, and score a touchdown. And now a 17-7 game is now 17-17. Jahan Dotson on a 2-yard rush, and Penn State is in good shape. And I'm not sure if this was the drive, but it was either this drive or maybe the one after that Steel Chambers was ejected from the game for, again, just another ridiculous targeting penalty. In my estimation, you've got a quarterback going down at the last possible second and changing your the point where you're going to hit. Your target moves, and if your target moves into where you're already committed to go, it's it shouldn't be on the defender. That's not his fault. And there was very glancing contact. To me, it looked like the side of his helmet hit the side of the helmet of Clifford, but he's out. And he's, Tony Gerdeman, if you go back and look at his tweets, you can see exactly, or if you look at the Grumpy Old Buckeye, I posted the tweet, the relevant tweet in the Grumpy Old Buckeye at BuckeyeScoop.com, where Gerd gave the stats of what Penn State did with Steel Chambers in the game versus without Steel Chambers.
Yeah, something has to be done in the offseason, but, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. Haven't we said this many years now, as long as the targeting part? I mean, I would only hope that when it comes to targeting, because it is so inconsistent, that if they can't come up with a consensus of what targeting is, at the very minimum, and I'm just appealing to, I don't want to say common sense, but what you would think maybe that the ideas that I have heard of, I know being the soccer fan that you are, that, kind of almost like the idea of like the yellow card kind of philosophy in soccer, that maybe it would be something along those lines. That would be a step in the right direction. It's not going to be a cure-all, but I would hope that there would be a consensus to get at least, okay, let's not make it an automatic ejection, because, as you said, Steel Chambers, Ohio State certainly felt his loss, in the second half, and will have to deal with the loss of him for the first half against Nebraska this coming week. I think that would help, but I completely agree with you. I did not think it was him launching. I did not think it was any kind of intentional, as you said, I think Clifford sliding down, very difficult to slow your momentum. And I just hope that they revisit the penalty phase at the bare minimum this offseason.
Yeah, like I said, Clifford's decision to slide came extremely late. And I actually thought Steel Chambers showed some restraint at trying to hold up, and threw his arms kind of up. And I never want a player to throw their arms up, because the referee just assumes you did something wrong and throws a flag anyway when you do that. But it definitely, there was nothing there, and it affected Ohio State's defense certainly for the rest of the game. So 17-17. Buckeyes add a sad short field goal from Noah Ruggles, 23-yarder, to make it 20-17. One of the issues on this drive, about 100 false starts, I think, in this game for Ohio State. Maybe it wasn't 100, but it seemed like 100.
It felt like it.
Yeah.
It certainly felt like it. I know where you're going with that one.
Just unbelievable. And I believe that one was on at the end that made them kick a field goal. I think that one was on Trayvon Henderson. I think they were lined up to go for a 4th and goal at the 1 when that happened. Then Trayvon Henderson adds a 1-yard touchdown run on the play I described earlier on a drive that went 71 yards in 3 plays. Henderson with the long run, he finally shook loose and made it 27-17. That was the play where they actually finally split some wide receivers out, spread out the Penn State defense, and gave Henderson a chance to find some room in the middle. Penn State did add a touchdown before the end of the third quarter to cut it to 3, and Ohio State tacked on a couple field goals in the fourth quarter. You get your final score of 33-24. And with that 33-24, Chip, you are the winner of the score predictions, because I only had Penn State scoring 13. You had them scoring 17. We both had Ohio State scoring 42. And so you were closer, because we both were way off on Ohio State. Well, not way off. We were both 9 points off on Ohio State, and you were within a touchdown of Penn State.
Well, I appreciate that, but I mean, I think a credit to Penn State for playing better than we anticipated. And looking at Penn State's remaining schedule, they go on the road to Maryland, they come home and they play Michigan in what's going to be a whiteout. Now that kickoff time has not yet been established for November 13th. I mean, we know it won't be a night game because it'll be beyond the the night game policy that the Big Ten has implemented, but it's entirely possible it could be a 3:30, which, with the daylight savings time, it'll be dark by the time that game is ended. Anyway, November 20th, Rutgers, and November 27th at Michigan State. I'm not going to be so bold as to say that Penn State's going to win all 4 of those games, but if they play defensively the same manner and in the same manner and style that they came at Ohio State, they could make things very, very interesting playing a spoiler role in the Big Ten East this last month.
Yeah, I'll be interested to see how they finish the season. I felt like Ohio State's offense got a lot of grief for this game, and rightfully so on a couple of things that we've already talked about, the penalties and some of the issues with the play calling. Especially, I thought the play calling in the red zone was poor. But the defense shouldn't get a pass because I thought the defense again was not very good at times. They gave up 11 third down conversions, Chip. That's not something you ever want to see. There were some penalties defensively as well. And just, the same kind of issues over and over. It's 3rd and 7, they pick it up no problem. 3rd and 4, they pick it up no problem. It's just, and they had, I think, all 4 of their sacks, if I'm not mistaken, came in the first half. I don't think they got a sack in the second half.
Yeah, I don't know if it was, the reason I'm kind of stammering over this, I don't know if it was because of the magnitude of the game, a national televised, we're wearing the all scarlets, if it was the quality of the opponent, because let's face it, that's been kind of one of these questions that we've had and others have had about, all right, well, how good is Ohio State really? Because the quality of opponents has always been, well, they beat Akron, but it's Akron. They, all these, Rutgers and you could go through that list. So Penn State was the first ranked opponent that Ohio State defeated this year. Now, granted, it wasn't as I guess you could say as such a dominating fashion as we had predicted, but a win's a win. But yeah, I agree. My concerns, definitely the red zone play calling. I thought that the running game certainly left a lot to be desired. As you said, third down defense was, reminiscent in a painful way of earlier in the season. So there's definitely a lot that the coaches are going to pick on and try to improve upon before they travel to Lincoln this coming Saturday.
Yeah. Now I do think there would have been more sacks had there not been such incredible holding that was let go. But
that's true.
You can't really do a whole lot about that. It's a little unfortunate. I also wanted to point out another aggravating thing, which was when there was a catch by Garrett Wilson. When he caught the ball, his knees were already on the ground. So he's down by contact and the whistle blows, and then he gets just destroyed by a defensive back. And there was a penalty called, but the rules expert on the broadcast made no sense in saying that he still has to complete the catch. He's down by contact with the ground with the ball in his possession. He's completed that catch. You can't just destroy a receiver because you might be able to jar the ball loose. That's not how it works. That's once the receiver is down, we call that a late hit. So I don't know what their rules expert is, they need a new rules expert, I guess is what I'm saying.
Well, I'm going to be kind of curious. I mean, we're not going to hear about it immediately. We may not hear about it at all. I don't want to tease and say, oh, we'll get an apology, but I'm going to be kind of curious about that officiating crew, maybe possibly like in the next week or so, if there's like a release by the Big Ten about, some of the blatant calls that were missed.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. It's, you go to other conferences and you see, and I'm not advocating for this, but I'm saying that if you watch the Kansas-Oklahoma game, you saw referees that were very interested in preserving Oklahoma's run at a college football playoff, let's just say, and you don't see that where it comes when it comes to Ohio State.
Very interesting.
Just say that.
Good point.
I'm not saying there's a conspiracy. I'm just saying if there was one, it would look a lot like this.
Yeah.
to quote Tom Moore. Anyway, let's talk about some champions. Jackson Smith-Njigba was the only champion on offense. 7 catches for 97 yards. And he's the only Ohio State offensive player to be a 6-time champion this year. Jerron Cage was Defensive Player of the Game. And there was a bunch of defenders on the champions list. Teron Vincent, Tyreek Smith, Zach Harrison, Haskell Garrett, Marcus Williamson, Ronnie Hickman, Cameron Brown, Cody Simon, Steele Chambers, and Bryson Shaw. Yes, Steele Chambers in barely more than half a game graded out as a champion. So, and also Noah Ruggles was Special Teams Player of the Week and co-Big Ten Special Teams Player of the Week.
Yeah, congratulations to Noah Ruggles. Obviously, that graduate transfer move that Ohio State pursued is paying off handsomely. Mm-hmm. If anything, what was considered, I don't want to call it a weakness, but a concern going into the season has been, almost essentially forgotten.
Yeah. Let's look at our picks to click. You had Trayvon Henderson, the free space on the offensive picks to click. And Trayvon Henderson did click. It took him a little while to get going. I was kind of surprised at his rushing total. I know he had ripped off one big one, but I didn't realize that he had enough other, decent runs to warrant his final statistics, which were 28 carries for 152 yards. He averaged 5.4 yards per carry and 1 touchdown. Not a huge game from a yards per carry standpoint, and only the 1 touchdown rushing, but 150 yards against Penn State. You got to say that's a click. I went with Chris Olave, who was targeted 9 times, but of those 9 times, probably 4 of those balls were near him. He did have 3 catches for 44 yards and a touchdown, the only touchdown reception. I'm going to call him a click because I just don't think they just didn't use him as much as they might have. And, it's kind of like one of those deals where, yeah, he was targeted 9 times, but that's just because a lot of those times Stroud was under pressure and just said, well, I'll just throw it over there towards Olave and maybe something good will happen. But he was really kind of throwing it away. So defensively, I took Steele Chambers, and I would say that he was very, very good in this game before the targeting call. So I'm going to say that's a click. Actually, didn't look at his stats, though. So let me take a quick look and see that Steele Chambers had 3 tackles. Not a lot, but he had a quarterback hurry, and he just basically, when he was on the field, the defense was much better. I'm still going to call that a click. And you, my friend, went with, don't you wish you'd have gone with Jerron Cage for this game?
Oh, of course. Yeah. Hindsight.
You went with Ronnie Hickman, and Ronnie Hickman did great out as a champion. And Ronnie Hickman led the team with 14 tackles. So you clicked as well. So we had a perfect sweep of the pick to click.
Okay. All righty.
All right. Well, we turn the page on Penn State, unless there's something else you want to mention here.
No, like I said, I think they are going to be a spoiler in the Big Ten East.
All right. Well,
in some way, shape, or form.
Let's hope so, because they can't spoil Ohio State anymore. Nebraska's up next. We now know that's a noon kickoff, so that's actually a break for Ohio State because that's 11 a.m. for the Huskers.
Yes. Yeah, and we do know that the Purdue game has been another 6-day hold, so that kickoff will not be announced until the evening of November 6th, according to Jerry Emick.
All right, so we will talk about our predictions for the Nebraska game a little later. We'll talk about the Huskers amongst ourselves, and we'll get our picks to click a little later. But why don't we get to our guest from this week, or for this week, and that's a person who knows the Huskers better than we do. We'll get to that right after this. All right, this week, joining us on the Silver Bullets podcast, we're happy to have with us the recruiting analyst from Hale Varsity. Greg Smith is with us. Thanks for being with us tonight, Greg.
Hey, thanks for having me, man. Appreciate you guys.
We should mention that Erin Sorensen, your colleague, was going to join us. She's been on the show before, and unfortunately, one of her pets passed away this week, and we're very sorry that Erin couldn't make it. Our thoughts are with her, and it's never easy losing a pet, so we wish her nothing but the best.
Yeah, absolutely. Anytime you go through something like that or see someone go through something like that, your heart goes out to them. So definitely wishing the best for her, keeping her in our thoughts.
Yes, and we appreciate you pinch hitting on short notice, Greg. And we're going to ask you about those Cornhuskers from Nebraska who just seem to every week find a way to lose by one score. And I guess the first question I have about that is really how patient is Husker Nation being, knowing that this is a team that actually looks like it's getting better and is getting very close to starting to get results for Scott Frost?
Yeah, I think we're at it's at an interesting thing, because on one hand, you are correct. They are looking better, and these games are close, especially against the quality opponents that they've lost to. The Illinois and the Purdue loss are what they are, and I guess Purdue has a better record than Nebraska, so they shouldn't be taken for granted either what type of loss that is. The problem that people I think are having is that it's year 4 under Frost when these close losses are happening. There's a world of difference between this happening in year 4 and it happening in year 2, because you really could sell this as even more progress and something to be maybe looking forward towards in the future. But when you've had this many close losses, you've had this many one-score losses under Frost, it turns into anger from the fan base pretty quickly.
So I have a question regarding Adrian Martinez, and as the recruiting coordinator for your site, I think you're probably an expert to answer this one. And not trying to stir up any kind of quarterback controversy, but it just seems as though, I can vividly recall Adrian Martinez as a true freshman coming into Ohio Stadium and nearly pulling off the upset in 2018. I thought this guy is going to be dynamite. And it just seems as though there's always, I don't want to say every game, but there's just plays that happen, turnovers at the most inopportune time. Is there, as far as the quarterback position, has there been any discussion about, because I know with Luke McCaffrey leaving, has there been any discussion about we need to start looking to the future and trying to, instead of Martinez, try and get whoever the next person up into that position?
So the problem with that is actually twofold. One, the first part, you're correct in that Adrian has done so many good things, and he's been statistically one of the best statistical quarterbacks in school history. Now, the quarterbacks here are really measured on championships, especially those ones from the past. So it's not really an apples-to-apples comparison, and people don't want to hear that he's been compiling stats. But statistically, he is one of the most prolific quarterbacks in school history. But as you also noted, those turnovers come, or those mistakes come at very poor times. And it's not just, it's the fumbles, it's the interceptions. There was an Iowa game a couple of years ago where if he had stayed in bounds, the clock runs out and Iowa doesn't even get a chance to get the ball back. Nebraska wins. Instead, he goes out of bounds. They punt, almost give up a punt return, and then a game-winning field goal for Iowa. Things like that just continue to pile up. And so there's the problem of he's good enough to keep you in games, but then he does enough stuff to help you lose games. And so there's that conundrum. But the part that's also an issue is that we don't know exactly what Nebraska has beyond Adrian Martinez. Logan Smothers is the backup, but we've seen very little of him. And his profile, if you just see him, is very similar to Luke McCaffrey, a fast guy who doesn't really have a big arm, but is kind of accurate. And so people are, I think, a little nervous about what he's going to look like in games. And so it's just a tough situation all around. But I think that Frost and Martinez are kind of joined at the hip when it comes to this tenure. He's the only starting quarterback that Scott Frost has had in his time here.
So, Greg, this is maybe an unanswerable question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Is Adrian Martinez a quarterback who is just unlucky, or is he a quarterback who, I guess for lack of a better term, lacks the clutch gene?
I would say lacks the clutch gene if I have to pick, because those moments when things get tight, he seems to always have something go wrong. I know you guys saw that Michigan game where Nebraska had the ball and was trying to go down to win that game. And just an inexplicable fumble where you think the ball is about to be blown dead, and hey, maybe 7 out of 10 times the ref blows that dead at that point. But the one of the 3 times he didn't out of 10, Adrian just happened to give the ball up in that situation. Like, there are just things like that continue to happen. I would say he was unlucky if this was like his freshman season and a couple of these things happened to him. But at this point, as a 4-year starting quarterback with just 3 games left probably in his career, I would have to just lean towards him just not having the clutch gene. And that's really a thing that plagues this entire team. When it's a team-wide thing, is that when things get tough and you squeeze Nebraska a little bit, things go sideways for them.
Well, Greg, you mentioned something a moment ago, just to kind of shift, I guess, from poor Adrian Martinez, because I'm sure he feels that enough from Nebraska fans. He doesn't need a couple guys from Ohio State piling on him. But what I was going to ask, special teams, that seems to be another thing that has just been it has to be a very frustrating aspect for Nebraska fans. I mean, watching that Michigan State loss, come down to, just in terms of the punting, for example. Can you talk about any kind of adjustments that Nebraska has made with regard to special teams units?
Yeah, so there have been some, and it's funny because Nebraska is a program right now that has not been good enough consistently on offense and defense to also survive poor special teams. Right, it's definitely cost them numerous games during the Frost era. It is famously here at least. He has not hired a full-time special teams coordinator the entire time that he's been here, so that's always a talking point because special teams has been so poor. But they did make a change at punter. And that has been fine. Like, since that change happened, I think there's been one wayward punt, but nothing to the effect of what happened against Michigan State. The kickoffs have been fine. Brendan Franke has been knocking those out of the end zone for touchbacks. And then just this week, they actually probably had their best overall special teams game because this week they made a change at kicker as well, where Chase Contreras came in for, I guess, former Big Ten Kicker of the Year Connor Culp, who had mighty struggles over the course of this season. Contreras came in and he hit his 1 field goal this past week. It was 2 for 2, or hit a couple of extra points as well. And so they made those changes. But, it's one of those things where now, as a Nebraska fan, you're probably just waiting for the other shoe to drop, because now that I've said that special teams have been pretty good for the last couple of weeks, that means that something will go sideways in them for the game this weekend at the most inopportune time. I've cursed him. I'm sorry.
I wanted to ask you about the red zone, because this is a tale of 2 Nebraskas in the red zone. Nebraska's offense is 16th in the country in total offense, but 53rd in scoring offense. So they're getting it down the field but not putting points on the board. On the other side of the ball, the Nebraska defense is kind of middle of the road against the run and the pass and total defense, but pretty good in scoring defense, 27th in the country. So how do you explain what's going on in the red zone for the Huskers?
Yeah, it's really interesting, right? So Nebraska's offense does a really good job 20 to 20, right? They can really move the football, but the problem is once they get about inside the 40, their chunk plays kind of disappear. Like, it starts to shrink a lot once you start to get inside that 40. And then once they get into the red zone, one of the things that's been a huge deal around here is Nebraska, up until I think the Minnesota game, had not thrown a pass inside the red zone all season. Like, they just don't throw the ball in the red zone. And then they have such struggles running the football that it really ends up piling up on them, right? So that's how you kind of get those red zone numbers that are so poor offensively. Now, they're good defensively. I think they really do have a pretty good defense. Over time, what you see is that over the course of a game, that defense wears down. But when because they get out there for so many plays with the offensive struggles, they have such problems playing complementary football. But the defense is pretty good. And I think that those guys on the heavy package that come in for the red zone are good players. They have pretty pretty good linebacker play as well. So I think that's what leads them to play good defense. But they also just don't have a lot of takeaways, and so they end up giving up yards. But then they shut things down once you get inside the red zone.
So we were talking earlier about Adrian Martinez, and I want to shift it more towards a positive side for him. And that is, if you could give our listeners, I guess, if you were thinking in terms of an offensive strategy against an Ohio State defense that is improving, but still not necessarily, lights out, so to speak, which players do you think Adrian Martinez would look to try, in terms of, I guess you could say keep the chains moving for Nebraska when they're on offense?
Yeah, I think that Samori Toure, number 3, the wide receiver, is a guy that they look towards. He had acquired a game this past week, but that had not been the case previous to that. He typically gets a lot of targets. I think the emerging top target for Nebraska, and you can't miss him when you see Nebraska play, number 11, Austin Allen, the big tight end. He's 6'9", so it's very difficult to miss him. Nebraska has done a really nice job of getting him involved here recently, and he's become kind of a security blanket for Adrian. And then I think the last thing, the third one that I'll say honestly is Adrian Martinez's legs. When things break down, like that's where, people probably feel most comfortable with going with, is that Adrian Martinez taking off and running with the football. And I think everybody in the Big Ten is kind of well aware of his prowess on the ground. And that's what you really want to do, is keep him in the pocket and make him make reads and decisions. But if you have trouble doing that, then he's definitely going to hurt you.
Greg, the offensive, you're looking at the rushing offense in this team, and Adrian Martinez and Ramir Johnson, their numbers are very similar, rushing the football, a similar number of attempts, yards per attempt, and yards per game. Where the real difference is probably in the red zone, since Adrian Martinez has 11 touchdowns. It's more than twice of what Johnson has. But can you tell us a little bit about the offensive style? Is this a lot of RPO type stuff? Is it an option look that Frost used to run when he was at Nebraska? It doesn't seem to look like the offense he ran at UCF, but there have to be some similarities there.
Yeah, there are a little bit of similarities in that they line up kind of in those spread principles. But I think the big difference between the Nebraska version of this offense and the UCF version of the offense is that Nebraska does run a lot more RPO, where Adrian Martinez keeps the ball. If you think back to Mackenzie Milton and that big season that he had right before Frost took this job, a lot of those highlights that you can remember from Milton were him throwing the ball downfield, like up the seam to Jordan Akins, the tight end, or outside to Smith, right? Like a lot of the highlights now that you can picture with Nebraska, there's some shots down the field, and they've done a better job of that. But there's a lot of running with Adrian Martinez, whether or not that's him keeping it, then mixing in some of that option game. They have done more of that as they go along, but it's not, of course, the old school option that Nebraska fans were used to. It's more of that Coastal Carolina style of option with the orbit motions and all of that. And they'll definitely motion those wide receivers in the backfield and probably 3 or 4 different ones they'll put back there to do that. And so that's really how they run the offense. And they've had to kind of transition to that. That was not the way that they originally kind of came into this season, at least wanted to move the football. They wanted to be able to hand it off and get behind a big offensive line that they thought would be improving. But that offensive line has struggled big time and has not taken the steps that they wanted. So they've had to kind of manufacture some yardage in that way.
So switching over defensively, Nebraska is one of those, I don't want to say rare teams, but I think by and large, maybe I'm in the minority here. You don't see a lot of 3-4 teams, especially I know that, Wisconsin also runs a 3-4. But my question is, with Nebraska defensively, which player or players do you anticipate, trying to, I guess you could say, be, I don't want to say the only one, but trying to rush CJ Stroud, who's only, so many games into his tenure as Ohio State starting quarterback?
Yeah, I think the first guy that you have to look for in that respect is 44, Garrett Nelson. We actually talked to him today at media availability, and his note about, playing against C.J. Stroud was that we've got to try to make him uncomfortable. He's a talented guy, but he's a young guy, so we want to make him uncomfortable on the road at Memorial Stadium. So we need to get pressure in his face, get our hands up, try to get some hits on him. I think that he's one of the guys that would do that. I think that JoJo Doman, 13, the outside linebacker, hybrid safety player, they can also bring on some blitzes as well. And then Caleb Tanner, number 2, is another guy to keep an eye out on for that. But I think that that's going to be really a key to Nebraska trying to hang around in this, is how well are they able to get pressure on Stroud and make him uncomfortable and try to not let some of those big shots that they want to take develop down the field.
Yeah. Greg, before we let you go, I want to put you on the spot. I want to ask you, where do you think this game is going to be sort of won or lost? What matchups are you looking at as the key ones? And I want to get you on record with a score prediction.
Okay, so the thing I'm really looking forward to in this one is the Ohio State wide receivers against Nebraska's secondary. So Cam Taylor-Britt, who's probably Nebraska's best defensive player, he probably leaves for the NFL draft early after this season. I know he was talking today about looking forward to matching up with Olave and Wilson and those guys. So seeing if he can hang with those guys will be really fun, and that will be a big matchup. But I actually don't think that's where it's won or lost. I think it's won or lost if Nebraska can actually get pressure on C.J. Stroud. If Stroud is back there making a sandwich in the pocket, just kind of hanging out, going through his progressions, it's going to be really tough for anybody to cover those wide receivers for a long amount of time. And as far as a prediction goes, I have a hard time seeing Nebraska hanging in this one. I think their average, like Ohio State's average margin of victory against Nebraska in the Frost tenure is something like 38 points. So I'm going to go with Ohio State 42, Nebraska 21.
Okay.
All right. I don't know if you're aware of this, but Nebraska has a habit of only losing by one score, Greg.
Yeah, so that has to break at some point, right? Like, that can't happen all year, which would be amazing in one respect. But if they keep this one to one score, I think that people will take that moral victory, as crazy as that sounds.
Yeah. Greg, where can people find you on the internet and your work before we let you go?
Yeah, you can find me over at HailVarsity.com. I'm all over the website with recruiting coverage on our YouTube channel at Hail Varsity as well. You can get after me on Twitter at GregSmithHB as well.
All right, Greg Smith from Hail Varsity, the recruiting analyst. Thank you so much for pinch hitting for Erin. Give her our best, and
yes.
we'll look to talk to you somewhere down the line.
Hey, Michael and Chip, I appreciate you guys.
Thank you, Greg.
And we are back. Thanks again to Greg Smith from Hail Varsity for filling in and just doing a great job, Chip, of telling us everything about Nebraska that we ever wanted to know.
Oh yeah, I thought Greg was spectacular, and again, our sincere condolences to Erin Sorensen, on the loss of her pet. I know that's a very difficult time for her, but we are grateful for Greg for his tremendous insights.
Yeah, I mean, having lost dogs before myself, I know that they're not just they're not just an animal; they're part of the family, and it's painful to lose them, and it takes some time to get over that. So we wish her the best. Chip, it is time for us to walk through the Big Ten results, and we are going to do just that because there were some big games this weekend. And why don't we start with Nebraska, because Nebraska played Purdue. And again, Nebraska loses by one score. Chip, this was 28-23. Nebraska had a chance to get in this game late, kicked an onside kick, and the onside kick, Chip, went through the hands of Cam Taylor-Britt, and it was recovered by Purdue, and that was it. It was it. Purdue wins.
Yeah, it just seems like there's just more and more agonizing ways for Nebraska to lose. And I know what Greg just predicted, but it just seems as though, okay, when is this finally going to turn in Nebraska's favor?
Yeah, hopefully not for at least another week.
Right, exactly.
Purdue is 3-2 in the Big Ten, 5-3 overall. Nebraska falls to 3-6 overall, 1-5 in the Big Ten. Maybe the best 1-5 Big Ten team there's ever been.
Oh, I would agree with that. Yeah. Absolutely.
Chip, Minnesota is on a collision course with the East champion because they destroyed Northwestern 41-14. They are now 6-2, 4-1 in the Big Ten. Northwestern is 3-5, 1-4 in the Big Ten. And Tanner Morgan had a just decent, efficient day, but they ran the football and played good defense and just basically blew the Wildcats out. And it's just a long season in Evanston.
It is. It's a very long season in Evanston for Northwestern. I think that they're going to really have to reevaluate and retool this offseason on both sides of the ball. The offense has definitely been an issue for many seasons now. The defense, with a new coordinator, it doesn't seem to be working well. So, yeah, Pat Fitzgerald's going to certainly have a lot of questions to kind of contemplate over the offseason.
The Maryland Terrapins, they bounced back, Chip, with a 38-35 win over Indiana. And Talia Tagovailoa threw for 419 yards in this game. IU's Stephen Carr ran for 136 yards and 2 touchdowns. High-scoring game, very close game in the end, but Indiana falls to 0-5 in the Big Ten, 2-6 overall. Maryland is back on track after a couple of losses in a row. They were 5-3 overall, 2-3 in the Big Ten. And more importantly, probably for Maryland, back on track to get a bowl game.
Yeah, Maryland. I mean, they definitely the terrain gets a little tougher because Penn State is coming into town, and last year, I mean, they went on the road and handled Penn State. They went to State College and won, 35-19. I'm sure that's going to be very much on the minds of the Nittany Lions. I think, as I said earlier in the show, I think Penn State certainly has it within them to come into Maryland and get a win. But like you said, Maryland's knocking on the door of bowl eligibility. And unfortunately for Indiana, no rest for the weary. They go on the road to Ann Arbor. So I think their season of discontent is going to continue.
Yeah. Now let's get to inexplicable Illinois. The Illini go to 9 overtimes and win on the road at Penn State, and then they come home, Chip, and they lose to Rutgers 20-14 at home. And this was a late Rutgers rally, 10 points in the fourth quarter to win it 20-14, and Rutgers improves to 4-4. They get their first Big Ten win of the season. Illinois falls to 3-6 overall, 2-4 in the Big Ten. I didn't really see this one coming after the last performance from Illinois. But again, it's like if you play Penn State, it seems like you play crappy the next week.
Well, let's hope that's certainly not the case for Ohio State. But as far as Illinois, yeah, I mean, you would have thought after such a momentous occasion going on the road, defeating Penn State in those 9 overtimes, that they would be up for this game against Rutgers. But some people obviously can't stand prosperity. In terms of Rutgers, I mean, I think it'd be fair to say that preseason, this would have been a game that I would have predicted Rutgers to win. But the way that Rutgers season had been going, the way Illinois recently had been performing, I certainly had it thinking that Illinois was going to do it. Mm-hmm. I think Rutgers' feelings of good fortune are going to end because they have the suddenly improving Wisconsin Badgers coming into town on November 6th.
You always love to spoil the next thing I'm going to talk about. It's like an uncanny thing you do. It's uncanny. Don't look ahead. Just stay focused on the task at hand. Illinois, though, Rutgers is 2 wins from bowl eligibility, but Wisconsin at home, Indiana on the road, Penn State on the road, Maryland at home. It's possible. Maybe they can beat IU and Maryland and get to bowl eligibility for Greg Schiano. That's a possibility, but it's going to be tough. The really the loss to Northwestern was a crippling one
yeah.
in terms of their bowl eligibility hopes. So we'll see if they can bounce back after a win against Illinois and keep things going. Now let's get to Wisconsin.
Okay.
Wisconsin, Chip, playing like the Wisconsin that we thought they'd be at the beginning of the season, our preseason predictions, and demolishing Iowa 27-7. Their offense is playing well in terms of running the football. Graham Mertz is still not great. He was 11 of 22 for 104 yards and a touchdown. Not really setting the world on fire. You don't have to if you can run the football at Wisconsin. I'm sorry, I almost said Nebraska. If you can run the football and play good defense at Wisconsin, your quarterback just needs to make enough plays to extend some drives, and Graham Mertz was able to do that. 27-7 the final, and the 9th-ranked Iowa Hawkeyes, who were once the 2nd-ranked, I think, Iowa Hawkeyes at one point, have lost to Purdue and to Wisconsin. And that collision course I mentioned earlier for Minnesota is that final game of the season when Minnesota plays the rivalry game against Wisconsin. Good chance the berth in the Big Ten championship game is on the line for that. And I really don't know if Wisconsin wins that, what happens in terms of, I guess Wisconsin has wins over both Iowa and Minnesota, and then they would maybe be the team to go, even though it would be a multi-way tie.
No, I think you're probably right. So since we already talked about Northwestern struggling, you mentioned how Wisconsin handled Iowa.
Yes.
Iowa, I don't know, in terms of where Iowa was a few short weeks ago, like you said, that they've lost back-to-back. They do get Northwestern this coming week. So maybe that will get them back in the winning mode. But, turning the attention towards Wisconsin, like you said, it seems as though that they have finally rediscovered what has always made them such a formidable team by going back to, running the ball effectively and maybe not expecting much from their quarterback. I mean, I know that Graham Mertz, Ohio State recruited him. I know he was highly touted, had a spectacular debut, but I think by actually asking him to do less, that's actually kind of helped the overall team. So it remains to be seen. I think, Wisconsin playing Rutgers, I mean, I think the Badgers will win that one. But like you said, I think they still have, games that could impact the Big Ten West. That, as you said, that November 27th game at Minnesota, that might be for the Big Ten West berth.
Yeah. So Iowa has only scored 14 points since playing Penn State. Chip, never play Penn State.
Well, a little too late for us. So.
Yeah, I think that's the takeaway. Don't play Penn State, because you do that and then you suddenly don't play very good football after that. I don't know what the deal is, but yeah, they scored 7 points in a 24-7 loss against Purdue. That was at home. And then 7 points in Madison in a 27-7 loss. So part of this is maybe Wisconsin does start to look better, and part of this is Iowa is looking much worse. This is the Iowa offense that kind of had me skeptical of them at the beginning of the year in terms of our final predictions, where I picked Iowa to finish second in the Big Ten West, and it was largely because I didn't think they had the offense to finish first. Then it looked like for all the world they were going to run away with the Big Ten West, and Wisconsin was going to be the team to flop, and now Wisconsin suddenly is back in the race, although it is a multi-headed monster race in the West. With, I think, Purdue still has 2 losses in the league, and you've still got Iowa, and Minnesota's got 1. So there could be a very big logjam in the West here, but some of that will get sorted out in the next few weeks.
Yeah, like I said, Iowa at Northwestern. As you just said, when we were talking about Wisconsin, Wisconsin still has to play Minnesota. So does Iowa. Mm-hmm. So and that Black Friday tradition of playing Nebraska, for all of the heartache that Nebraska has experienced this year. Wouldn't it be something if Nebraska could, be, that ultimate spoiler, on Black Friday to ruin Iowa's chances at a share of the Big Ten West?
Yeah, I'm sure that Nebraska fans would enjoy a win over Iowa, or anybody at this point. But
that's true.
Yeah. And then, of course, the noon game that everyone was watching, Chip, it was Michigan at Michigan State, 6-8. And Michigan looked like, for all the world, they were going to just run away with this game early. They got out to a 10-0 lead after the first quarter. They led 23-14 at the half. And then Michigan State came to play, and we've seen Michigan lay eggs in the second half of games earlier this year, notably against Rutgers when they couldn't even get a first down. Sparty comes back and wins this 37-33, and Kenneth Walker III looks terrifying. 197 yards, 5 touchdowns, and I am extremely concerned about what he's going to do to Ohio State's defense.
As well, you should be. If anything, it's tough to defeat a team that just won't quit. And I mean, it's a credit to Mel Tucker, because when they were down, like you said, repeatedly throughout the game, I was watching it with one of my sons, and the next thing you know, Michigan State just started chipping away at that lead, and all of a sudden it didn't seem insurmountable. It didn't seem unbelievable that the Spartans could do it. And like you said, Kenneth Walker III certainly demonstrated his Heisman Trophy. All of the people that are promoting him for the Heisman Trophy, certainly justifiable in that regard. And as far as the Wolverines go, I mean, Jim Harbaugh is certainly hearing it from the local and national media about some of his coaching moves, especially with substituting J.J. McCarthy in, late in the game when Cade McNamara was doing fine. From what I understand, I saw something on Twitter that I guess there was McNamara was dealing with some kind of a minor hand injury, which is why McCarthy was in there. But even so, I think the full credit has to go to Mel Tucker and his team. And, yeah, that game against Michigan State on November 20th is looming large.
Yeah, it was one of those games, Chip, where it was, even though the score never got really out of hand, it just seemed like Michigan State wasn't in the game. It seemed like Michigan wasn't in any danger, to the point where I actually started flipping around and catching parts of other games. And then I kept coming back, but I wasn't riveted. I wasn't like, oh, this is very compelling, kind of thing. But
sure.
Once Michigan State started figuring out that Peyton Thorne doesn't need to throw the ball every down or even most downs, and you can just keep giving it to Kenneth Walker, and eventually he's going to make some plays, it got done. And the other part of this is that there is let's see, how should I put this on a family podcast? Let's call it a clinch factor. Whenever it comes to Jim Harbaugh in a big game, especially against his rival teams, at some point a part of his body clenches really hard and prevents him from getting any, I guess, oxygen to other parts of his body or something.
Right.
And the team melts down, and they just don't make plays. They can make plays for 3.5 quarters, but when the game's on the line, they don't make those same plays anymore in those big games. And that's I don't know how much of it is inner pressure. I don't know how much of it is pressure from the coaching staff. I don't know how much of it is. I think the play calling gets worse when it's late in close games for Michigan, but I'd be anxious to see, what some of the stuff that Gerd writes about this game and says about this game, because Jim Harbaugh cannot beat his rivals, and that's really the key to him having success at Michigan. Is he's got to get over those hurdles, and if he can't get over those hurdles, he's never even going to play in Indianapolis, let alone in the college football playoff.
Well, as I said earlier, the Wolverines have the advantage of they have Indiana coming into town this coming week. And I know that Indiana gave Maryland a good game, but I think I think the Wolverines are a different category. So they might get things untracked. However,
then they go to Penn State.
They go to Penn State, and that is a whiteout. It's not a might be or could be. It is going to be a whiteout, and it would be a shame if that turned out to be the big noon game, because it would kind of minimize that whiteout impact that could really benefit Penn State. But even so, I think going on the road into Penn State is never an easy thing, no matter what time of day it is. So yeah, I mean, like you said, Harbaugh does not do well in rivalry games, and Penn State certainly classifies the Wolverines as one, and we'll have to see. And as far as Michigan State, getting back to them, let's see. I joke about it, but it's true. Let's see how they handle Prosperity, because they're playing Purdue, and as you duly noted earlier when we were talking about Iowa, at the time Iowa was number 2. Nobody thought Purdue could do it, and all of a sudden Purdue went into Iowa and upset them. So when it comes to with Michigan State, they're actually going on the road to Purdue. So we'll see how that shapes up this coming weekend.
Yeah, it looks to me, just watching this game, that the key to beating Michigan State's defense is give your quarterback time to throw. They're going to give up plays in the air. They're going to give those up. You may not be able to run against them very effectively, but if you can protect your quarterback long enough to get some passes out of there, you can certainly throw. I mean, McNamara carved them up pretty good in that game, but still, they just couldn't make enough plays, especially in the second half. You're right, Michigan State now will go to Purdue. It's a 3:30 game on ABC this week. So after the Buckeyes, you can flip over and see how they do. They will host Maryland. Then they go to Ohio State on November 20th. That time has not yet been announced. And then they close with Penn State at home. So a lot of football to be played, and it really still is anybody's division in terms of, I think, Michigan State, Ohio State, Michigan, depending on how they navigate the rest of their schedules. Ohio State controls its destiny, but so does Michigan State.
Yep, absolutely. Like I said, Michigan State's looming large, and I understand, because I have the same feeling, because I was in attendance in 2015. It felt like I was, just completely waterlogged. Sitting in C deck. So I understand the concerns, and the ghosts of 1998 are still very, very real for any Ohio State fan.
I would actually feel better for Ohio State if they were going to East Lansing. It seems in recent years they've played better against Michigan State in East Lansing than at home.
That's a really good point. Sometimes it just seemed as though, especially earlier in Urban Meyer's tenure, you know what I mean? Like, it was kind of that back and forth, and, and with all due respect to, Ryan Day, in terms of, like the first 2 years, for his tenure, Michigan State really didn't have much to go on. But yeah, Mel Tucker has executed a dramatic turnaround. So that November 20th game is going to be very big.
Yeah. So beating Michigan, a team ranked below Ohio State, got Michigan State to vault over Ohio State in the rankings. Not that the rankings mean a whole lot this time of year. And I actually think that plays into Ohio State's hands. I think it's much better for Ohio State to be ranked lower if they enter that game and they're still undefeated than if they're ranked higher. I think that that is a definite sign of quote-unquote disrespect that Ryan Day and his coaching staff can sell his team.
Yeah, I'm sure he's going to be trying to seize on every possible psychological advantage or slight, perceived or or otherwise, to try and find, whatever it will take to, try and have the Buckeyes at a fever pitch when that game kicks off.
Yeah. One thing I didn't mention before with the Ohio State 33-24 win over Penn State is the one factor that I don't think anybody took into account with this game, and that is that if you look like you're wearing pajamas, you might play a little sleepy in the game.
Okay. Never thought of it that way.
Yeah. Ohio State was wearing pajamas, essentially, it looked like.
Oh, okay.
Wear your normal uniforms. Come on.
Well, you know, my thoughts on this have never changed.
Yeah, I know everybody's like, oh, very, most of the people in my timeline, oh, those are fresh, those are fire, and I'm like, no, they look ridiculous. They look like they're wearing pajamas. The monochrome look, I just hate. I hate it not for Ohio State. I hate it for all teams. I don't like the monochrome look. It just looks like you're wearing the matching pajamas that you used to get as a kid.
There you go.
So
absolutely.
Plus, I might be biased, but I think Ohio State has the best uniforms in the country. So, if you look good, you play good. Yeah. Look good, and play good.
Quit altering with them.
Yeah, there you go. And if if you want to do it once a year, change your look one time a year, just to give the recruits something to look at, that's fine. But just don't make them pajamas. Just make them variations on the theme.
There you go.
Anyway, it is time to talk about Nebraska. The Cornhuskers come into this, Chip, and they're not good. They're 1-5 in the Big Ten, 3-6 overall, but it's not all bad for Nebraska. They've just been, I think, in a lot of respects, they have been unlucky. I know that Greg said that maybe Adrian Martinez doesn't have the clutch gene. He's just not. He's not very clutch. Based on some of the ways that these games have finished, and there could be some truth there. Maybe he's wilts under the pressure of the moment late, but he still has very good numbers. This is a team overall that has some very respectable numbers. I mentioned some of this earlier. Nebraska has the 16th ranked offense in the entire country. They're putting up 468.8 yards per game. And that's very odd when you look at where they are scoring offense-wise. They're 53rd. They're scoring just under 30 points a game. So those are not matching up. They, like Greg said, they're getting down the field, and then they're not punching it in. They're not turning that into points. I think some of that also is they're moving the ball late in games when they need touchdowns, and they're just not making the plays at the ends of the game. So I think that's part of it too. But they are capable of moving the football. They are capable of making chunk plays, either in the run game or the pass game. They are 28th in the country in rushing offense, 202 yards per game, and they're 35th in passing offense, 266.7 yards per game. It's pretty respectable on both of those parts. So the offense, again, they're moving the football, but they're not getting points at the end of drives, or they're turning the ball over at in the red zone.
I think what's going to be interesting to see is how Ohio State truly defends Adrian Martinez, because he is such an integral part of that offense. I mean, it sounds really cliche, like it's like saying, well, like CJ Stroud is. I mean that in the sense that, Adrian Martinez, Greg even alluded to it, not only passing the ball, but running the ball. Mm-hmm. So with Ohio State, still trying to figure out what they do well defensively, that to me is going to be one of the key matchups as to how they scheme against Adrian Martinez on Saturday.
Yeah, I think one of the things that is going to be interesting is to see when they do get pressure on the quarterback, can they keep gaps from appearing that he can escape through? Because one of the things that does look like it's working for the Ohio State defense is that the pass rush seems coordinated to the point where there doesn't seem to be an escape route for the quarterback when there's pressure.
Very good point. Yeah, I think that they have definitely, in terms of we saw some of that against Penn State. Kind of one of the sacks of Sean Clifford. That Tyreek Smith was able to apply pressure, and then JT Tuimoloau was able to clean up, so to speak.
Yeah. So I think that is a key, is to keep him in the pocket and, try to make him throw the ball, or just don't give him anywhere to go. Because I think that Ohio State's secondary should be able to hold up against Nebraska's wide receivers. There's some talent there, but I don't think it's like what we've seen in some recent years with guys like J.D. Spielman and people like that. I think that their receiving core is not quite at the level that it was a few years ago.
No, it isn't. I know that Greg gave us, some names and things like that. But yeah, like in terms of, J.D. Spielman recently announced his retirement from TCU, after transferring, Wan'Dale Robinson, I believe, Kentucky, so they've lost some of those, jitterbug type players that would be more concerning for Ohio State. So that's not to say that Nebraska doesn't have good receivers, but they don't have nearly the same kind of multi-dimensional threat that those other players represented.
Right. And now, given the numbers that I just gave, I will caution everybody to don't panic if it looks like Nebraska's moving the ball right down the field, because, again, they have done this all year. They just have not been able to, like Greg said, once they hit the 40-yard line and the field is a little bit more condensed, they're not able to make as many throws or plays in the passing game. And once they do get in the red zone, they don't like to throw it at all, which makes them a little bit more predictable. So they may get some points, they may get some field goals, they may move the ball, but don't panic on that. On the other side of the ball, Chip, the defense is 44th in total defense, allowing 348.4 yards per game. That's pretty middle of the road. The passing defense is 49th at 211 yards per game. The rush defense is 51st at 137 yards per game. They're not great numbers. They're not terrible numbers. But where they are doing well is the scoring defense is 27th. They're only allowing 20.3 points per game on average. And so what that tells me is they're a very bend but don't break defense. They give up yards, but once you get down into the red zone, they make it difficult for you to finish off drives.
And this is where Ryan Day needs to not be stubborn, as we discussed earlier. You know what I mean? That It has to be, yes, you want a touchdown, but sometimes coming away with 3 points is better, especially in light of the fact that, as you said, it's like you don't want to be driving the length of the field just to have your offense stall out and come away with nothing.
Yeah, and I would say this. I think that they really need to start going back to Jeremy Ruckert in the red zone. And he's a player that is difficult to match up with anywhere on the field, but especially I think down in the final 20 yards of the field. I think he presents some matchup problems for the defense, and I think that that's a place that you can go. And, if you're not wearing your pajamas, you should be not playing sleepy, so you should be able to finish those off. And it also will probably help if the other team doesn't know what plays you're calling.
Yeah, that should be an advantage.
Yeah. So, and I think that they got a break by not having a night game at Memorial Stadium. I think that they got a huge break by getting a noon game because it's 11 a.m. local time. Not that Nebraska's not used to playing at that time from time to time, but I think that is a more normal body clock time of game for Ohio State than it is for Nebraska.
I agree with that. Yeah, I certainly think. Ohio State, I think this is certainly something where they caught a break not having to go on the road. I mean, I know Nebraska fans are tremendously loyal in terms of showing up. Playing against Ohio State is always something, even though it hasn't gone well in recent years. But, yeah, I agree with you. I think Ohio State, they're going to be fine in terms of their body clock.
All right, Chip. Well, it's time to do that thing we do every week, and we're going to start with our picks to click. And last week we started on defense, so we're going to start on offense. Where do you think? What are you thinking? Pick to click on offense, Chip.
Well, I'm fully anticipating you saying that I stole your guy.
Well, that only happens when you steal my guy.
Jeremy Ruckert.
Nice. Okay. I am not going to say that you stole my guy. I think this is a defense that can be exploited in the secondary, and I think that it's not just the tight ends. I do like some of their defensive backs, but I think that the Ohio State wide receiving core is going to be a little bit irritated coming off the game that they just had. I think they're going to want to be more explosive, and I think that they're going to push the ball down the field more. And so I'm thinking wide receiver here. And when I'm thinking wide receiver here, I'm going to say that I'm going to go with my safety blanket the way that, a good quarterback goes to his safety blanket, and that's in the slot. I'm going to say Jackson Smith and Jigba.
I like it.
Okay. Now, the good news here is that usually when I pick a wide receiver, they click, but someone else clicks more. So that's actually a good sign. Defense. It's defense time, and I get to go first. And this week, I'm going to take Ronnie Hickman.
I figured as much, especially after Greg talked about when it comes to, I think Austin Allen at tight end. That seemed like a really good selection.
Yeah, it's an RPO team too, so I think safeties generally have to make a lot more plays against RPO teams. I think that they're going to be rallying to the ball when it's outside. They're going to be coming off the edge when the quarterback keeps and that kind of thing. So I like Ronnie Hickman. I like the safety against an RPO team.
So this one is going to be kind of off the beaten path. Now, in the sense that, again, as you mentioned, RPO, and I certainly, I think, Ronnie Hickman definitely fits the bill in terms of, his versatility. I'm going to go with Taraja Mitchell. I like Taraja Mitchell to kind of help negate some of Adrian Martinez in terms of the mobility. I may prove to be mistaken, but that's kind of where I'm going.
Okay. I thought Mitchell got a lot of snaps, it looked like, this past weekend, and I think at times he struggled, but I think the more snaps he gets, I think the better he'll be, and I don't hate the pick, so there you go. We'll see how he does this week, and we'll check our picks to click after this week. But now it's time to really put ourselves out there with our score predictions. Chip, do you have a score prediction for Ohio State at Nebraska on noon on Saturday?
Okay, well, I'm not going to say that Nebraska is going to stay within one score. I know that is, their usual mode of heartbreak, but I'm not going to. I'm not going to say that. I do think that it's going to be less than most Ohio State fans are predicting. So I'm going to go Ohio State 38, Nebraska 17.
Wow, you and I are just. It's like we brain share. You said 38-17?
Yeah.
I had just written down my score, and I also had 38, just like last week we both had 42. I think Nebraska at home hangs around tough. I'm going to say 38-20.
Okay, there you go.
So again, it'll be very easy for us to pick a winner next week because we're picking one score the same again, just like we did last week. So if Nebraska can be held to 17 or fewer, you are the winner, and if they reach the 20 mark, then I am the winner.
Okay.
And if they're in between 17 and 20, then we'll have to figure it out. I don't know if that's a Price is Right showcase situation.
Yeah.
Or what.
Rice-A-Roni, the supply of Rice-A-Roni.
Yeah. All right. Well, we of course will come back next week. We'll figure out what has transpired. We will analyze it. We will talk about it, and we will look ahead to the next game because Ohio State is playing and playing and playing the rest of this month. They will then host Purdue. They will then host Sparty, and then they will go to Ann Arbor for the game. And we don't have a time yet for the Purdue game. We don't have a time yet for the Michigan State game. But it won't be a night game.
No, it will not. Jerry Emig made that abundantly clear in the tweet that he sent out today about the 6-day hold about Purdue, that it will not be a night game, but it will be obviously a 12 or 3:30 p.m. game. So remains to be seen which network.
Yeah, so hopefully it'll be a 3:30 game because this time of year after the clocks change, 3:30 game is essentially a night game.
Oh, it is. Absolutely. I mean, a 3:30 game, I mean, I understand that, like some people really love this. Just in the interest of full disclosure, the first couple weeks of the daylight savings time always has me a little down in the dumps, just because the whole idea of it being dark at 5 o'clock just has me very sad.
Yeah, well, the whole idea of winter in Ohio is a sad thing, and it's definitely a harbinger of winter time.
You don't have to twist that knife. So.
Yeah. All right, Chip. Well, I guess that's going to do it. Well, let's just do what we do at the end, and you can tell us where we can find you on the internet.
I can be found on Twitter at Chip Minnich, last name spelled Minnich, and I'm a contributor to Athlon Sports. So you have heard my score prediction, but look for an article about Ohio State at Nebraska on athlonsports.com later this week.
Yeah, you can catch me on Twitter as well, at Mike36Fan, on BuckeyeScoop.com. I am the grumpy old Buckeye, moaning and groaning about stuff every week, no matter how good or bad it is. And you can, of course, sign up for BuckeyeScoop.com. You can listen to all the other podcasts, the Buckeye Weekly and the Morning Scoop and all that stuff, the Sloopcast. And there's a lot of good shows there. And we'll be back next week, and we will break down the Nebraska game, and we will look ahead to Purdue, and we will, of course, take our normal walk through the Big Ten. Thanks again to Greg Smith. Certainly, again, our best wishes to Erin Sorensen, and we're sorry we missed her. Sorry that we couldn't have her on, because she was really great last year when we had her on. But Greg was awesome also, so I don't want to sell him short. Thanks to both of those fine folks from Hail Varsity. And Chip, nothing left for us to do except what we always do at the end, and that is to say, Go Bucks!
Go Bucks!